Besides foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly to the
broadcast from later. Live from the hyper-present, Udit Vira, Macy Siu, Valdis Silins, me, Robert Bolton, and our friend Alison Creba joins us today. Alison is a researcher focused on building deconstruction and the reuse of materials as an alternative to the usual demolition. Her work reframes old architectural stuff as cultural and physical resources. Hi, Alison. Does that introduction sound all right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Hi.
Cool. She is like end-of-life care for the built environment. Weak signals are things we notice on the peripheries of our radar, things we don't really understand yet we suspect may be influential on possible futures unfolding. Each of us has brought in a weak signal of change. We do not know each other's weak signals in advance. We just do our best to unpack, make sense, speculate, and be reminded that I don't know anything. Robert, what's your weakest signal?
The thing I've been thinking about this week is a project by Jonathan Keats, who is a artist, calls himself an experimental philosopher, who kind of brings concepts out into the world to make things with them and see what they do. And he has this project called Pioneers of the Greater Holocene, and it involves these kind of Soviet-style visual aesthetics and sense of like camaraderie, this project to like re-terraform the Earth. And so what it does is like bring these like group of different pioneers like in different cities, he's starting in San Francisco, to like seed literal seeds and things like this of a particular kinds of plants that eat concrete and lichen in particular, that there's some type of lichen that eats concrete and dissolves cities in a certain sense. And so the project is to re-terraform the Earth, this time in like a good sense as opposed to like the kind of unconscious terraforming that we've been doing for the last whatever you want to put it at, 10,000 years since agriculture, 300 since in the Industrial Revolution, 60 since the highway system, however you want to think about like where the marker for terraforming begins. So one thing I've been thinking about is like how, it's sort of a meta question, like how do you interpret art example as a signal? Like what does that mean? How do you do it? Because it's not like example of a technology that might just be present elsewhere in greater numbers and in greater like ubiquity, but it's something like a little bit different and a little harder to make sense of, you know?
Yeah.
I think there's many ways into this, but that's kind of how I want to frame it.
I first want to ask, like, is art as a signal or is art the antennae in this case? Because that's something we've obviously talked about before. And the Ezra Pound artists are the antennae of the human race. Marshall McLuhan wrote about it. Does that, and then they're saying artists, but I think the artworks themselves tend to be, and like the signals are somehow within them, or something is signaled from those as well. I don't know.
But what's the difference of an antennae and a signal? Because I can imagine a lot of artists also doing, like being pioneers of particular technologies. Like that very much happens as well, and that is easier to make sense of. Whereas this example is a little more like he's being provocatively playful, you know?
Yeah. So that is the signal. I think the difference is just one is sort of like signal source or place that you might be like looking to read signals versus the signal itself. So maybe it's a trivial distinction in this case. I don't know. But
no, that fits with the pioneer idea or whatever that I said. Like the artists often pioneer like new pieces of tech or whatever.
Yeah, can we kind of break down some of these pieces first, just to make sure we're understand it? What is the pioneer side? Are we talking about like original pioneers of specific places on Earth, or what was that?
Well, so the Soviet pioneers is like the Soviet Boy Scouts from like 50, 60, 30 years ago. And so he's resurrecting some of the imagery around it. And so the art project itself is the organization called the Pioneers of the Young Holocene. So it is the kind of like t-shirts that they make, and it is the seed packets that they're mailing out to people. And so the artwork is organizational, which could also be a signal in and of itself.
Yeah, or at least a way of a medium of art as well.
Yeah, like relational aesthetics kind of.
Yeah, or organizational aesthetics. Corpcore.
Wait, so how is it manifested? Is there a piece, or is it like a performance art, or what is it? What does it look like?
Well, they've actually created the organization itself. in this instance, or?
Yeah, the organization exists. I mean, it depends on where it's being performed. If it's like a lecture, if it's like in an art gallery, there's like photos and things like that that you can find. It has been in a gallery context so far, and knowing him, there will definitely be lectures given on the topic that'll also probably constitute its own performance of the work.
And sorry, the plants that you mentioned, the seeds, how real or fictional, or what's the deal with those?
They're real plants.
I didn't know about plants that eat concrete.
Apparently rhubarb eats concrete.
Rhubarb eats concrete?
Apparently it can do that. Not eat it, but it can break it up. Its roots will break it up.
Cool.
I was going to say, like, all rocks or all minerals on Earth are broken down by plants. Like, that's why there is soil and stuff. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
So it depends on what scale and speed you're talking at, but probably even the weakest plant could eventually eat concrete if it, enough generations of it landed on it.
Mm-hmm.
But in what way is it deliberate? If all plants do eat concrete in that sense, like in what way is it deliberate? Like how is it done so that, it's not happening accidentally or it's happening in a more kind of purposeful way? Like in what way is it purposeful terraforming as opposed to just plants growing?
It is kind of seed bombing in a certain sense, but it's like the idea would be that it's a coalition between people and the plants. And it's not just plants, it's lichen as well, which is like its own little hybrid category of two different organisms symbiotically brought together. But the idea would be that I think the pioneers would have to like take care of these plants over time. And it's not just like dropping packets of seeds or whatever, but it's like a specific project to kind of break buildings apart, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, it's cool. Yesterday I went for a walk in my neighborhood. There's a lot of buildings with ivy growing outside, and I was wondering if that ivy actually affects like the structural integrity of the walls outside. And is it some sort of like mutual coalition, also mutual like arrangement between like these people and like this plant, and the people are benefiting from this like the aesthetic quality that it imparts, and then the plant is benefiting from like this like substrate on which it can grow on. But I never thought about like what is the implication on like the environmental and kind of material side. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, definitely there's pros and cons. There's like the pro is, I think that people talk about it being like a shade layer, like a way of sort of like insulating from the sun. And there's like their thermal aspects to having plants grow on buildings or around them. But then they also get their little tentacles into the mortar and stuff and do end up deteriorating, or at least being like vehicles for moisture to get into the masonry. And so they're like generally regarded as bad news. But then they're also like very romantic aesthetics associated with that.
The history of like architecture and plants, I mean, I guess that falls into something like landscape architecture, which tended to be like sidelines for most of the history of architecture. But I actually haven't thought that much about it. I have heard that like trees, like so I'm looking outside, there's like trees out in the front. They'll like search for the water pipes, and they'll wrap their roots around the water pipes and sometimes even break them.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. And looking for the signal. It's interesting, like I think for our temporal situation and when we grew up, when you think about destroying buildings, there's like obviously you're thinking about 9/11 as like a major event and the destruction. And that was like, for some reason, my mind automatically went to, oh, this is like slow terror or something. And that's like the idea here, sort of different motivations and all of that. Although in some ways, perhaps there's something around just like destroying something about our existing system. Seems timely too, where at the moment, skyscrapers have never been less relevant than they are right now, particularly like the giant office, banking, financial buildings of, say, downtown Toronto or wherever, that are just nothing's happening and look really dull and useless, I guess. Stadiums as well, like our modern day cathedrals and so on are kind of looking pretty lacking at the moment.
Could they be repurposed into like greenhouses and stuff? Because they don't make any sense from an insulation perspective. These like giant, or at least for human comfort. You have to like artificially cool and heat them and all that stuff. But
Alice, do you know if these plants are particularly good at destroying concrete?
That's the idea. Yeah, that's the idea. I don't know which ones in particular. It is about turning it into soil, though. That's kind of the idea.
It's interesting too, just because concrete is like regarded as like one of the worst materials for the earth. It has the most embodied carbon and has all of this sort of associated energy that's inside of it. And so the idea of sort of like repenting or returning that material to the earth is really interesting, because right now there are not very many ways of doing that. It's kind of like this dead stock that has just one life the moment.
There's like this concept of like just natural decay, but again, probably very slow.
And isn't it true also that actually the act of creating concrete is like doing all this terraforming work on Earth? Like, aren't there these like crazy stories about like people like destroying like entire sandbanks and like actually changing the shape of like continents because of the sand that's being used in like massive construction projects?
And the sand that is used for concrete, which is not all sand, but a specific kind of it, it's a limited resource.
Yes.
I wonder, does this plant turn that concrete back into that kind of sand, or is it something different after it goes through a process of transformation? You know, like the way plastics can't be recycled, they can only be downcycled. It's like, can sand only be downcycled or something?
Yeah, well, that's the current
interesting.
state with concrete for the most part. Can't upcycle concrete yet.
The slow thing is interesting that you mentioned, Rob. There's like a concept of slow violence in the environmental space where different forms of environmental pollution will affect different communities at different rates. And so in order to get it like acknowledged at a legal level or even just a conceptual level, they've come up with ideas of like slow violence to describe how polluting an area like causes whatever rates of cancer and other things to go up.
Yeah, this is slow violence against the aggressor, I guess, or slow self-defense, depending on how you're looking at it.
There's also the question of control, which is like all of the like other forms of terraforming that you mentioned and were sort of ideas of repairing the earth or sort of like fixing it for the better or informing its direction with a stated outcome, but with not really understanding the full scope of what could happen. And it seems interesting to me to sort of like plant a seed that there are no real understandings of what the implications of this project are, whether they are necessarily good or bad, sort of, and handing over a form of control to other beings that are not human, to like the plant world.
It seems like every sort of agricultural intervention ends up having some unintended consequences that we don't know. When you said plant a seed, it was like I immediately went to like GMO and things like that, where lots of good can be done, but unexpected bad also occurs in ways that we can't understand.
Do we think it's a signal or do you think it's noise?
I'm looking for the signal. It's a lot here, for sure.
Another way like the way if we wanted to reduce like signal was the question of like, what does the Anthropocene mean? And like as a vibe of an era, I think it's like ending in some ways. I mean, this is my personal take.
That's interesting.
And what I mean by that is like the terror over having transformed the earth and set in motion like autocatalytic processes that are feeding back on themselves, and it's all out of control, and we've, you know, triggered this kind of set of cascading effects, and it's just causing like anxiety and terror and trauma, you know, to people the world over. And you can see it in like the aesthetics of like the Extinction Rebellion, who's like you know, this form of just like eco horror, they call it. And I think there's like a coming period that's like not as afraid of like the Anthropocene, that doesn't see it as like a thing to fully be feared, but maybe embraced in some sense. I mean, the title of this project, Pioneers of the Good Holocene, is kind of pointing to that idea. The Holocene, by the way, begins like 12,000 years ago. It's like the Ice Age, which is also when agriculture starts.
Valdis, if you had to give the new kind of era name, what would you give it? Like, I'm just trying to figure out what are you trying to point to? Is it like the chaos? Like the fact is that the Anthropocene was about like control held by humans, right? It was like about the human, the anthro, right? What is like the future? Is it like chaos scene, for lack of a better word? Or is it like the bioscene, which is like, you know, nature is back.
Right.
Or something like that. I don't know.
Viral scene.
Viral scene.
I mean, my take on it was not that I was trying to, I didn't mean it at a level of like, oh, there's something other than the Anthropocene coming. I meant more like the feeling that we get when we hear that word, you know, triggers like fear and anxiety. And it feels like every discussion of climate, you look at some of those like New York Mag articles like 3-4 years ago about like the very like rapid scenarios for climate degeneration. I think that just produces paralysis. And I think that kind of, we had to go through that period, and now something else is emerging. It's not that like the human component inside of the Anthropocene is suddenly over. I think the tenor of it is a little different.
It's the most politicized geological epoch I've ever come across. But I think that's what you mean
compressible.
when you talk about the vibe, right? Like it's like the Anthropocene is not just a geological era. It's like a tool for communicating about climate and it's like and human influence on the environment. And it's maybe a very real geological era, but it's very much been like hijacked as like a political rhetorical device and as well for certain people and for certain academic agendas and so on. Do you guys disagree?
No, I agree, actually.
My understanding is it's also a real, thing, but
I think it serves a purpose. Like even the idea of like understanding geological eras as in these categories, that's something that we constructed and for our own understanding of the world. I think what's cool about it, and this is something, I have a friend who runs a large climate action network in Canada, and she is also a huge sci-fi reader. And her perspective is that the Earth is actually going to be fine. We humans will probably won't. And our time might be coming to an end. And I think that this like handing over or sort of like reconstructing or sort of like throwing these seeds into the wind feels a little bit like that, like a little bit of like, we know the Earth is going to be okay and there's a longer time scale and we might not be on it for the next Whatever-ocene or be around to even name it. But this sort of like affirmation of an unknown and something that maybe we can't know. Maybe that's the signal. A signal to the future. Maybe the seeds contain a message.
Yeah. I like all of the talk around just like becoming extinct elegantly, personally. I'm here for it. Humans becoming extinct elegantly. And I absolutely agree that like nature has nothing to worry about. It's just our species and a bunch of other species that go down with us.
The koalas.
Like koalas. So this is taking us here.
It's like doing like a meditation on death, right? Like, how you do personal meditations on death. It's like, a civilization level meditation on extinction.
Learning to die in the Anthropocene.
Yeah.
Acceptance of it.
Learning to die in the Anthropocene.
But there was also that Paolo Antonelli project on like designing the death of a civilization or something, but it got criticized for being very blindly Western centric, I think, and attributing like a global tenor or affect to something that was actually quite localized. It's like, no, it's only a particular form of human life that's dying, actually. It's not the species as a whole.
Yeah, fair. Good point.
Bands of us that scavenge in the wastelands.
And I think that's the thing too about this. What the most interesting signal to me is what you're calling the vibe of the Anthropocene, because it makes it a little more micro in terms of like time and what we're talking about. Like, I feel like even in this conversation, we've a bunch of times conflated the Anthropocene with something much shorter in duration than you would normally think of a geological era, and also conflated it with like human attitudes towards nature, towards our environment.
The way I put it earlier this year to you guys was that in 2020, climate is going to be canceled. And that's how I meant it. I didn't mean it like that it's not an issue, like far from, like, of course it's an issue, but the kind of reaction to it that's gone on for a number of years of just like panic, I think is like coming to an end. And like, you'll have had your time to mourn and it's like time to get on with it. Do the work of getting out of this mess.
And that's the interesting thing about a lot of these conceits of treating this as a moment of meditation on death and acceptance of death, is that the point is not at all to panic, because really panic is usually not good for survival nor an elegant way to die. So the point is you kind of accept it and then you kind of get on with behaving in a more rational, or just you get on with doing your job.
Valdis, when you were saying climate being canceled, do you think it's because of like some sort of like empathy fatigue or something like that, or like too much information about, what's happening, or is it something else?
I think it's the sense of just like paralysis of not being able to do anything in the face of something much bigger than any one individual or country is able to do. And climate's been like on the radar since the 70s. Like, it went through a little penumbra period for like 20 years or whatever in the 80s and 90s, and nothing's happened. Like, emissions are just going like up exponentially. Like, nothing has happened for 40 something years. And I think that window of just not doing anything and then also talking loudly about not doing anything, like Greta Thunberg kind of sums up a bit of it, symbolic protest politics, appeal to pathos and fear in a lot of instances.
Just to like answer the signal or noise question, I kind of am leaning towards signal of, basically what Valdis was talking about, which is like a signal of a shift in vibe. I see it, I get it. I think that makes sense.
It's too easy then, damn it.
I think there's a lot of signals in the shift in vibe, so I'm going to say noise. It's part of I'll say a signal in the chorus.
A signal in the chorus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't feel like a change in direction, but it feels like an affirmation of like a larger, subtler thought that is happening.
Evidence. Macy?
Maybe we go back to like, we hope is a signal that, you know, we are actually moving in the right direction.
Hope it's a signal. I like the hope it's a signal a lot. Okay, great. Udit, what's your weakest signal?
So my signal is inspired by a text that I received from a friend. And I think what I'll do is I'll just like read out what he said. So this is, I'm quoting here. He said, "I was sent an innocent looking image on WhatsApp and asked to forward it back to the same friend on Facebook Messenger. The image triggered Facebook content moderation filters as inappropriate and got my personal account blocked for 72 hours. So this is something that happened to this person, right? And what he's describing is basically an adversarial attack. So he got an image of something which was like super benign, like a picture of like a cup or a table or like a flower or whatever, which was intentionally created to trip up the AI that Facebook Messenger uses to figure out if an image contains nudity or not. And just to explain what an adversarial attack is, basically it's a cyber attack where the attacker deliberately provides an input that exploits imperfections in a machine learning model. And like, I guess a thing to like pay attention to is the fact that what humans see when they look at an image is very different from what, you know, an image recognition algorithm would see. So you can have this case where the human shares an image and thinks it's like perfectly safe, and the computer sees something completely different, which is going to trigger or trip up this like moderation filter. But the thing that I was interested in when I was thinking about this was there's this weird sort of like parallel connection that I see to what's happening with COVID, which is we have this block of information, which in this case was an image of a cup that has jumped from one host, which is WhatsApp, where it was acting fine, to another host, which is Facebook Messenger, where its own community defenses, which are in this case the moderation filters, have performed this action to protect it from the community that it can potentially impact. And so the thing that I was thinking about a lot when I was thinking about this is, you know, how in the future are genetics and sort of memetics going to inform each other through this whole COVID situation? And so as an example of that, in this COVID scenario, what's happening is one of the reasons why coronavirus has been such a struggle to contain is that it doesn't actually affect that many people, right? It affects like a super small amount of people. And because of that, the community transmission is super high because, you know, you're going to go meet people, think you don't have it, but you actually have it, and you spread it around. And now imagine the same sort of strategy being used for cyber attacks, where someone purposefully designs a meme that's like has a lot of viral potential and it's going to be shared by a lot of people, but it's only going to be triggering moderation filters about 5% of the time, which is like, you know, a very low amount. You can imagine the scenario where this like meme like takes down like millions of people on Facebook and no one even notices where it's coming from, right? And so that's like the thought that I was having about this. It's like, I'm still like, this is like a very recent speculation and I'm still trying to like grapple with it and decide like what I think about it. But anyway, that's my signal.
What I find to be the most useful new term, Venkatash Rao, is this cozy propaganda, like what you're suggesting? That you could kind of slide under the radar. It's not meant to go viral. It just keeps kind of going. It seems benign, but in fact, propaganda, it's like something apparently cozy, but actually loud and disruptive at some point before you notice.
Right. Are we saying coronavirus is a cozy virus?
In some way, and that allows you to be cozy for a couple of weeks with that incubation period, certain aspects of it. Yeah. And in fact, what it's caused a lot of people to do is live a cozier life.
Wait, so the content moderation of WhatsApp and Facebook are not the same?
Are not the same. They're different.
Which just surprises me a little bit. Like, why would they set up two different systems to moderate?
I wonder, I just imagine it's because of like, it's like pragmatic. They're two different teams and like there's like legacy components.
And probably different levels of security. There's probably just different rules on each platform too.
Yeah.
It smells like inefficiency to me. Short Facebook. That's the signal. Short Facebook.
Get in there. Nope.
Bottlenecks in the workflows.
The signal for a long time.
But you know, if it was the same, you'd have like the same like failures happening across the board. Like, I actually think it's better that we have this diversity of sort of protocols, right? That like are not going to all fail due to the same attacks.
The other thing I just couldn't help myself is this a signal of a machine vision sensor trained on 2 girls, 1 cup, and identified the cup as the thing that you need to censor every time, and so cups are now being...
I don't actually know if it was a cup. Cup was just like an example I was used.
Oh, whether the image wasn't a cup.
I don't know what it was, but I don't know.
I gathered that wasn't the point, but
Yeah.
Or like some background that's like very common in porn movies suddenly becomes like the trigger, right? Like
right. There's I mean, that's the
like
funny
a
thing.
shaggy couch is all of a sudden like the sign of, or I don't know what that it's probably a bad example.
But it's these things, like, they sound funny, but they're actually super related to all of the like really harmful AI biases that are in the justice system and places like that as well.
Yeah, but have you seen these images that people are using for adversarial attacks? Like, so I can take a picture of you, Rob, and like just change like a few minor pixels here and there. And they have these algorithms now that allow you to do it, that are designed purposefully to like push certain pixels around in the right places so that it's going to trip up the algorithm. It's not even happening at a visual level. It's happening at a very, very sort of pixel level.
And this will be just an ongoing sort of arms race forever.
Yeah, exactly the same as viruses and vaccines.
Can the same concept be used for protection?
Protection of who?
Like going the other way around. I'm thinking kind of like digital rights management stuff. So like locking instead of infecting.
Give me the scenario.
Like embedded.
Like a watermark or something.
Yeah, like embedded pixel as a watermark that is unseen and undetected.
Yeah, they already do that, right? That happens.
These are weaponized watermarks.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are weaponized watermarks. But I guess like the other kind of connection is like this whole concept of steganography, right? Which is like hiding messages inside of messages. So taking like a song, for example, and embedding like information inside the waveforms, for example, which is like something that's, if anyone listens to like Aphex Twin, like it's one thing that's he often does in his songs. They always have like these sort of subliminal messages like embedded inside the waveforms. But the same sort of thing happens in images as well, where there's like messages hidden inside pixels and people use them. Have used them.
I just saw a thing this week that was the inverse of the example that you're giving, which is like the example you have is human invisible but machine readable images, right? The machines see it one way and humans see it the other. The example I had was of people saying that like the only secret communication channel you'll be able to have online in the future is like going into some random game world and like shooting with bullets like your message.
Oh yeah, I saw that as well.
That's great.
Like so meta, like so hidden inside the layers of information.
There's always a message in a bullet.
It's like planting for the future. Maybe it's like your previous project, planting these signals in a formation. It's not the thing, but it's the way in which they're planted.
Like Easter eggs or something.
We'll have to like send satellites up and take pictures of the Earth and like decode messages by looking at like the arrangement of trees on the planet.
Voila, yeah.
For me, I'm going to say like there's a signal here that I'm not sure where it goes, but it definitely makes me curious as just around like what can I do with media? What can I start to do with images? And how it kind of really does tie back to Valdis' piece, because it gets me thinking about like art, how a particular file, whether an image, a piece of audio, video, can do more than just represent what's happening in that image, in that song, in that whatever, but I have some other sort of purpose or way of moving or maneuvering or hacking a recommendation algorithm or a censoring algorithm or whatever the case may be, but get it to do something that is sort of a secret use or a second use or a second means of communication, a second signal other than just what the audio sounds like or picture looks like.
But that's not a new thing, right? The idea of like subliminal messaging has been around for a while.
No, but I don't mean subliminal messaging. I sort of mean more like it's getting a system to do something, to put it somewhere, to, like to allow it to be transmitted or not allow it to be transmitted to certain people over certain platforms. So it's like, that's different, I think. And that's interesting.
It makes me think of like in the 90s, there was like some kind of radio wars that went on in New York City where the way that songs were mixed was increasingly like to raise the amplitude at every level to be like into the max, like the red, because that would then be like when you're playing it in your car, like in the street, and you're playing it to like people outside, that's like the thing that travels the best. So songs that have like a lot of dynamic range where it's like quiet and loud and quiet and different instruments and mixed at different levels just don't travel as well in like outdoor spaces. And so when you're competing to get to the top of the charts, New York City in the 90s was like the place you had to do it first. And so like this particular car culture of New York City determined how songs were even mixed in the first place.
For sure. That's interesting.
There's so much compression in
impact.
songs now.
Yeah.
Because of that, right? Like the reason why songs are all compressed now is because of what happened in the 90s. There's no dynamic range left. They're all compressed to like a very narrow kind of like band of amplitude.
That's a great analogy though, Valdis. I think that's exactly the sort of idea. It's like, it's not just the song, it's this other way of essentially hacking the algorithm, but in that case it's this really analog, like it's the cultural algorithm. It's like if the song is being blasted out of the car in a populous city like that, it's going to spread the same way that now you would want to figure out, how do I get this on Spotify to secretly have these things that you can't necessarily hear. It doesn't change anything significant about the art itself, but somehow gets it placed in the right places or with the right people, something like that, or gets it banned. Nothing could be better for your music career than to be banned without.
with no I want to see that, like adversarial, like,
right?
I can't wait till like the first scam rapper starts like screwing other people over by releasing like SoundCloud versions with like fake whatever, like frequencies manipulated to get it banned or something like that.
Yeah, the worst.
That's so interesting.
Into the top.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, Signal, Macy.
A signal just in terms of new ways for art and media production to be having multiple functions.
Alison?
Yeah, it's a signal for sure. I think mimicking those interesting ways of thinking from the past and opening up some new horizons. So yeah.
Cool. Udit?
Yeah, I think it signals like applying sort of like Darwinian evolutionary thinking to information. It's like just like extending like the idea of like memes and memetics, right? To think about like what kind of media forms survive, what doesn't, and actually like deliberately shaping media so that it, you know, survives in this like evolutionary landscape.
Yeah, there's a lot here. It's interesting where we took it. Also that it got me so excited about something that's in some ways like it's a system that's can be irritating or that you might complain about in a lot of ways as well.
Have you designed any, Udit?
No.
Adversarial, perturbarial examples?
But I want to after this. I'm just like thinking about what to like, how to use it.
How do they reverse engineer the machine learning stuff? Like, how do you even? Do you just do like a brute force type of thing where you manipulate pixels and eventually you find like, oh, these three, whatever?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it is brute force. I think you like just like trial your design image with multiple and see in what ways does it break. But if you have an understanding of the model, I guess you can use that to design it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Okay. Alison, what's your weakest signal?
My signal is something that I heard about recently. It's a Facebook group called A Group Where We All Pretend to Be Ants in an Ant Colony. There are currently 1.8 million members of this group, and it seems to be getting now a bit more press. I don't know, it's just a curious kind of thing. There's like a set of rules that govern the group, including how the queen should be referred to, ant names. Everybody has to refer to each other by their ant name, which is just your regular name with the word ant in front of it. But there's also no human politics allowed in the discussion group, or comments on COVID or any sort of like human related activities. And basically what happens is like people post images of like pretzel, and then all respondents sort of in cap locks like write lift. And it's just it's kind of this like cooperative discussion about moving food mostly. There's other content in there, but it's mostly like people just say like lift and bite and lift and dig. So yeah. And I thought it was funny, and I joined the group, and I've sort of been scrolling through and I haven't posted anything. I haven't lifted anything either. I haven't done anything. But yeah, in discussion, a roommate of mine was like, oh yeah, actually, like I'm a part of another Facebook group that is all about corn, and everybody's name just gets changed to corn. And all of the
different strands of corn?
Yeah. Different strands?
Just corn. C-O-R-N. Anyway, it got me thinking about this, I guess, this idea of sort of a world, a realm in which embodying, for one, sort of like these, it's not that they're inanimate, but they're just, we don't understand what they're saying, but also sort of this like very objective, collective mindset that's like unaware of the world around us. And yeah,
It's
I don't
sort
know.
of like a meta comment on Facebook itself around like the dynamics of social media. Places like, you know, like how is a like different than a lift, you know?
True. Yes. Okay, that's true. Also, but everybody's one. Like you're just you're all this nondescript sort of like beings in this colony of nondescript beings, and you know to what end? I don't know.
Who gets to be the queen?
That's a good question. I don't
Good
think
first
the queen, somebody gets to be the queen. I think the queen just exists, but who is the queen? That is a good question.
Are there other colonies? Like, because don't ants, well, it depends on the species, but a lot of ants they have like soldier ants and stuff, right? Who have to fight off other colonies.
I think there's types of ants. Like you're a lifter or a digger or a hiker.
Uh-huh.
I love this example. It's ridiculous.
Do you get to choose your role, or is it like, how do you become part of it, and how do you know what role you have?
It's self-selected, it's the role that you have. And I think, yeah, you just get to participate to your own level. The queen is fictional. There is no queen, no actual queen.
So no hierarchy. Everyone's just lifting and digging and
lifting
again.
I also think about like so much time spent on the internet, so much time like doing nothing, and it just is like the nothingness of what the internet has become, or like our time has become, or like what ideas of productivity, I guess, also like it's just so bizarre.
To me, that's like an indicator of how low information density you need between when you're communicating to have like a positive shared experience, right? You're not actually communicating that much. You're just like, it's just one word, which is lift. And yet you feel like you're having this communal positive experience, which is why people stick around. And it relates back to like cozy web ideas, where like our experience of the internet right now is so like informationally dense and rich. Like we're actually like, maybe we want to move away from that to something that's way more information.
Yeah, it's funny you call it rich. You could easily say informationally dense and poor as well.
Yeah,
experience of the
hot and cold media.
It's also like this collective intelligence seems to be a big signal here. It's like collective intelligence, no matter how dumb, there's value in it for people. And I can't help but think that people are psyched about the sort of telepathic nature of that kind of like swarm, hive, whatever you want to call it, ant intelligence. Back to antennae again, I guess. But their ability to just kind of know what to do and to cooperate. Is this signal about like a cooperatively moving food? And is there somehow like this whole thing just a political demonstration around like how we should be thinking about food and how it's distributed and shared?
And food waste.
Yeah.
Just like all of the crumbs that are dropped on the ground.
Yeah, the food waste is interesting. I was thinking like, you could even decouple it from the content of like the food, and it's like a desire for some just like collective project of any kind because there's such an overemphasis on individual initiative and like, you know, the age of like the hustle porn and like it's all about you and building your brand, and here you become part of this like anonymous like swarming hive that just consists of 3 simple actions and nothing else, and your individuality is totally subsumed into the broader collective purpose. And you know, a lift on its own, it does like nothing to like speak to like Udit's point, but like 20 lifts is all of a sudden like the creation of like a joyful experience somehow. Without the thing being lifted being like elevated the way in social media it is. Like an individual post is the thing that gets like everybody excited, whereas here it's like everybody who lifts is just as much the creator of the thing as the poster, I imagine, at least. Like I was actually curious if there's like different status things like in the different foods. Like are people seeking like the most like hive friendly food, or it doesn't matter?
No.
Have you guys seen the Ouija boards on like messaging boards? Do you know that sort of interaction? It's like a big thing on Reddit, where the way it works is like people just like enter a single letter of the alphabet, and people will follow it up with another letter, and like the swarm kind of like upvotes and downvotes different letters until like a word forms. And like people, like everyone can vote, right? And so like in the end, you come up with like a word that is revealed because of this like swarm collective behavior. And it's like these are really, really popular on like messaging boards like Reddit.
Hive spirit. It also reminds me, there's like really basic addictive games where it's just, there's like one button and then you're just hammering a nail all day or hammering nails all day, and it's just how many can you do? Or I don't know what the main examples are, but this was like a thing several years ago. But the idea of taking that and make it just as simple but collective and cooperative in a game is kind of interesting, like basic addictive cooperative gaming. It's just interesting that there's that appeal and that there might be more to it.
I just realized that this whole thing, this Facebook group, is an MMORPG. It's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, but in a very different format than we all often think about it.
Yeah, people are talking about it like a role-playing situation in that they're escaping their current situation, obviously. And also to think like you don't need to know anything about an ant, or like most people learn about ants when they're very young and they're not complicated, and explore through this sort of like bug's eye world is.
It's so funny. Just a zeitgeist comment. I was talking to a friend over the weekend about ant farms and how cool they are, and just possibly thinking of going over to the old science store, picking up an ant farm.
I used to have an ant farm when I was a kid.
Same, yeah. Pretty cool. There's the reason it came up is because I don't know if any of you guys saw this. There was a paper published recently about using CD jewel cases to create essentially like an ant farm, but it's like a way of studying roots. And so there's like a science paper, and they were just like publishing on this technique of I guess like growing plants in a CD jewel case so you can view the roots, because ant farms were like that too. It was narrow.
Cross section.
Exactly. See the yeah.
Interesting. Oh, cool.
Just other ant news.
Yeah.
I think it's a signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you don't? I mean, it also, part of me thinks it might be just like a weird fad, like one of those like glom on kind of situations. Or maybe it's a signal of this moment of the isolation and like a desire for a larger sort of connection to the.
Has there been an insurgence of members since COVID started?
I don't know. There's an NBC article that I read, and another article I read. I mean, they speak of it in the COVID context, in that inignorable condition of our world. But I think I don't know.
There's a question too of like at what time of day do people like use this? Because like a lot of back when people like went to workplaces, like the peak time for like YouTube and stuff like that was all at like I forget what it was, 10 a.m. or 3 p.m. or something. It was just like all work hours at the time when like the social media platforms are just flooded because people are just trying to like get away from like their kind of nonsense job and whatnot. And like I wonder what relation the ant thing has to that experience of wanting to get away from work.
Cutting work to lift.
To tie into also your first project though, Valdis, they also have merch. There's this sort of like organizational aesthetics idea happening here.
That's funny.
That's cool.
I wonder if anyone's like role playing the virus or anything too, or too soon maybe.
Too soon.
Too soon. For me, this is a signal. I'm going to say it's a signal of mainstreaming interest in spaces of other intelligences, and a sort of like empathy for the intelligence of different species, or at least a curiosity that people are partaking in that. So I think that's something. This is maybe a signal that I would place with several other signals that are out there that suggest this could be happening, or a signal I would place next to my own biases and interests in plant intelligence.
I would say, just to echo the personal biases or to contextualize my own, I think it's also interesting as a signal in the same way that Valdis's project did the Earth on a different scale, and objects and sort of livelihoods on a different scale and timelines, and that are contingent on so many other random factors, that we have sort of this compulsion towards innate habitual behaviors, and just to resituate those on a world that is our own but very different in scale and time. So
I like it as like almost a a way that people are trying to cleanse their social media addictions and habits and compulsions and stuff like that exist, that it's like, let me just go even further into like just automatically doing like one thing instead of scrolling. I'm just going to keep typing lift, and like taking over that as like a somehow a remedy to like the problem of information overload on the internet or something, or addiction to social media feedback.
That was going to be my split on whether like signal or noise. Like I think depending on how you frame it and dice it, but I was thinking about how it enables you to have a critique, in a performative critique of the social media dynamics, but at the same time reinforcing the importance of the platform. Because part of me during this was thinking like, oh, Facebook still has vitality. Like if this thing can emerge, right? All the things that Facebook tried to do top down, like it tried to institute a marketplace, didn't it try to do currency? That fell apart.
Libra,
like it's tried to do all these things and they all fail. But then the thing that works is kind of these like bottom up, like random, emergent, literally emergent, like case study emergent examples. And it still has vitality as like a platform on which unexpected can emerge. And so it's both like a critique of it, but it's also like, it's not really a critique because you get the pleasure of like using the platform.
I guess so, but just if you're protesting against the city in the city square, you're still protesting. And that's what big part of it feels like. Everyone's just like a big fuck you to like everybody at Facebook, and sort of even just a fuck you to the idea that there's people like trying to make sense of people's behaviors on Facebook. That's what some of this seems like.
Is there an ad targeting category for the ant people?
Yeah. Sell them.
What do they get served like most? What kind of
Pretzels.
I love pretzels personally.
The fact that it's like ants and corn, there's something interesting about that to me, that these are these very essential forms of life in some way. I don't know what that is. There's something about those are the things of all ordinary things that could become a weird communal activity like this.
Yeah, I think it's just a signal that we're just craving simplicity and back to the basics, and wanting to escape, like you say, like the busyness and the overwhelmingness of what has become our everyday.
I want an exoskeleton.
Start selling your exoskeletons.
Merch.
Yeah.
Merch.
To me, the signal is being human in human ways, which is the point that you were making, Rob.
Okay. So Macy, what's your weakest signal?
It's not necessarily weak, but I was interested in kind of what's happening in terms of presentation methods in the art world now, and looking at virtual exhibitions and what the commercial art world is doing now that those spaces where physical artwork is inaccessible. So Hauser and Worth, which is like a Zurich-based contemporary modern art gallery, they have been working on a virtual reality exhibition modeling tool that is meant to be able to allow the artists to plan shows from a distance. And they've been working on this since 2019. And also it's meant to be able to like project art fair logistics down to questions about like crating, shipping, and storage and all that stuff, and just to streamline exhibition planning. But then because of the pandemic, they have like accelerated that process and opened it up as a completely virtual exhibition that takes place in their gallery site that is not yet opened, that's supposed to be open in Spain in 2021. So it was just curious to me, like all of these kind of tensions in terms of is meant to be used to plan exhibitions in a very like streamlined, thinking about logistics and, what are the costs and, reducing all of those costs. But then, and then like in that sense, like really looking at like the commercialization aspect of the art market. But then now it's able to completely open it up for access in the 3D world. But at the same time, it's looking at physical pieces of art. The way that they've created the tool is like a totally bespoke technology stack. So they're using techniques and tools from architecture, construction, as well as video game to create like this true to life scale and authentic look within the virtual 3D space, like at a pixel level, rather than like relying on combined photos because the site is not yet actually built. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to kind of like open that conversation up a little bit.
So it's a planning tool, right? Not like for visitors to go check out.
It was
anything.
meant to be, it was meant to be a planning tool, but then now it has become a means to access an almost like non-existent gallery, but where you can also look at physical works, I think.
Having not seen it yet, but my assumption is that it's like a signal of just like such lack of imagination among the bureaucracies and gatekeepers of the art world, that it's like creating a virtual solution and it's like a white cube.
And as well,
like,
also it's like
possible. Meanwhile, Travis Scott is coming down from Mars to like destroy the Earth at his concert. It's like, it's like
gonna be Biden.
European art galleries are like, we've made a virtual white cube here that you can hang your art in on the internet, you know?
And it's also problematic in the sense that on an island in Spain, and obviously there are local communities there, but you're just like plopping a gallery there, I guess, like to cater to the crowd that would vacation there, and then hopefully they would buy art. But then there's also this weirdness where now it's, I don't know how long it was sustained for post-COVID, like in terms of opening it up completely. So digital access is completely open, but then also this like concept of how does exclusivity, how might that be redefined on the digital plane? Like, for example, like for Frieze Art Fair, they always have like VIP viewings and they've moved it online. So they're essentially just having like earlier online viewings where you need a password to enter. But it seems so completely arbitrary. And so
I feel like the exclusivity side, though, is carrying on from the trend of like the printing press, or, you know, like something that you've had sort of the age of mechanical reproduction changing the nature of value. And it's sort of, it seems like a bigger deal when you're dealing with a new media than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And the internet's already been creating infinitely replicable art for a long time. It feels like it's like, yeah, I don't know. I kind of stick with the, like, it feels dull and out of touch kind of.
The most interesting thing I think about this for me is like the fact that it used to be a planning tool and now it's being used as the real thing. Like the fact that when planning tools become good enough to be the actual thing itself, right? Like, this is like a map territory thing. This is like when the map becomes as good as the territory, what is the distinction, right? And can it ever? And like,
yeah, sorry, is that a thing? The map territory? I'm not familiar with that. That was like
the map is not the territory?
Yeah, that of course, but the idea that the map could become as good as the territory. Anyway.
I just feel like that's like a part of the discourse right now when people are talking about simulations, right? That simulations are becoming as good as the real thing.
Nonsense, but okay.
I mean, I also definitely did not experience it. It definitely is not as good as the real thing at this moment.
Absolutely.
You know what it should be is like you get to like the artwork becomes the cube or something, so that you have to like walk like at a pixel level, like on the paint itself or whatever, or something like that, you know? Because I was thinking, Udit, when you said like, oh, simulations are becoming as good as the real thing, or people are saying things like that, I was like, well, the genesis of simulation was like in nuclear simulations, like modeling the very like minute, like split, minuscule pre-second of like a set of chain reactions to see what would happen, and that was like impossible for humans to access at any scale. So what would, you know, not to use a simulation to reproduce reality, but to like reveal something you couldn't see before would be kind of like an interesting thing. So how could you use that in the context of art to see something that you didn't see before would be interesting, as opposed to just recreating like a box. It's like, who cares? Like, it's like the last thing I want to do. You know?
Yeah. No, that's really cool and interesting, I think. You mean like at the pixel level, but also like temporally, like seeing like how it was created pixel by pixel, for example. Yeah,
also,
that'd be cool.
I feel like it would be interesting to get away from even just thinking about what kind of art we think of is displayed typically in art galleries. Like, the limitations of the gallery are in and of themselves like something that Rob's critique is like trying to exist or challenge the notion of the white cube, and even like people who are making whatever like 3D digital objects or artworks that don't fare well in art galleries. Or even just like larger scale objects or relational projects or organizational aesthetics or these types of things. Like, I don't know, maybe that's not a fair critique, in that just critiquing the fact that art galleries are limited or offer only a limited experience, like, but that's a one experience to have, and it's something that people are missing. And
it makes me think that like the most obvious application for it would be like for whatever that like middlebrow art reproduction market is about, like paintings for your home and stuff like that, that just I forget what the names of the people involved, but these are like multi-million-dollar industries that are all based on like particular artists who have these kind of like workshops and they're just outputting all sorts of different pieces. But like the ability to like see that in a virtual gallery and then instantly like use your dumb little avatar hands and put it into like your home, your virtual home space, like in an AR application would be hilarious, I think. And like maybe a lot bigger than we want to admit it would be, like given our taste sensibilities and hopes for like other futures.
I feel like Alison's example of like this like group thing is like a more interesting creative online experience than anything that's happening in our world online right now.
Well, yeah, well, I was thinking just that, and then like Valdis's sort of organizational artwork as well. It's like that's an example where, okay, what's the map and what's, you know, the artwork is as a model or whatever, it's as real as anything. There's no sort of separation between representation. And it's like, I think that's like the response to this signal for me is like, stop simulating. Like, like this is such a lack of imagination. Like, why make a building when you're dealing with a different media? I mean, that's one thing you can do, but it's been done so much in areas like video games and so on, and film, that areas that aren't covered by this corner of the sort of traditional art world. Why are they thinking that way? It seems so late, and it should be instead like, why isn't it an atomic level art gallery? Why isn't it an ant farm gallery? Like what happens when you put the gallery on the ant with the ant colony and that kind of thing? Like, and have people be like ants climbing through a hill, finding, you know, seeking out the art within this ant mound. All of these things that we've been talking about would be like a more interesting, novel online experience trying to simulate that gallery. I don't know. I've heard about so many of these things and I've just been like, I don't want to go. It's the same thing with keynotes and whatever. Like, I don't want to go to another, like, like it should be something else. So, like, we should stop simulating.
Isn't a big part of the gallery, I mean, it depends on what element you're looking at, but a big part of it is like the social networking moment of the opening of the show, right? And so like, does this Spanish version have like an element of just bringing people together? Like, how are these people going to form? Because if we think of it, the art market or the industry side, it's like very much like a thing to launder money with. And so
like, it's at a dark web.
And part of that is like, through the network's evaluation that occur through like curators and small talk and the stuff that happens at all the openings, that it's all about like establishing, pumping up the value of a given piece, you know? It's like an inflation mechanism. Galleries are there to like inflate value.
To create value also from nothing.
Yeah.
But also artwork is amazing to see in person, and it's just so dull in any other way. Like, you can't simulate that. Like,
some of it, but unless it's designed to be, that's my view. It's like, if it was
unless the tech is like integral to like the experience.
The concept of the piece,
which it could be, and that just seems like it would make way more sense to focus on at this time. Or it would be like so much more exciting if they were like, we're taking a gallery to deviantart.com or like some well-established, even like antiquated online art community.
And also, like, they probably spent a lot of money on this.
Yeah, and if it's just like images, like, why don't they just like put the images on a website? Like, what is like the form that's being displayed? Is it just images? Is it just visual art, or what is it?
I don't know whether it's just images or whether there's like sculptural elements, but probably mostly those kind of object-based forms.
The other thing that gave me like critical instincts here was that just in general, the tendency to build when it's maybe not necessary. And I get that in this case, they were building a tool that maybe didn't exist and was going to be very like tailored to certain uses, and that's fine. But I always want to like wonder why something needs to be built before building it. And I think in this case, there could have been so many really creative zero cost options, and maybe it should have just been put in the hands of artists. But maybe the signal here is that these institutions will become obsolete because they've sort of lasted based on just like maintaining a particular social and economic situation that was working, and now not so much. It's sort of like late night hosts versus YouTubers right now. It's like, oh, you're actually not as good at this as you seemed. There's without production, there's all these other people who are better at their jobs than Jimmy X, you know.
Are you saying that broadly about art in general or about a specific kind of art, Rob?
I'm actually talking about the institutions in this case.
Okay. like institutional work.
Yeah. In terms of the way that they're presenting the work, not so much the artists. Yeah. I feel for the artists who Atom Media or work in paint or sculpture or so on, and feel that that's like essential to their work and don't want to switch to digital. Fair. I don't mean to criticize those people at all. Signal. It's a signal for me. It's obvious what it signals to me. Lack of imagination.
I would probably just say no, because I don't think it's like there's anything unique. Like if it is a signal, it's just among the rest of examples like that either demonstrate like what you were describing as like the decrepitude of like institutional art world, or what Udit was mentioning earlier, which is like the cross-pollination of like architectural and game design and like 3D entertainment tools going into these other fields that I think is going to happen with all sorts of other domains and instances and things.
Yeah,
like I think you're going to see businesses using those tools a lot more than.
But whether it's done well and whether it's, done in a creative way and actually like enhancing the experience is questionable.
Yeah, I mean, and we haven't seen it, so we might be missing something here, but I'm curious to think like what are the assets that these institutions have, which I imagine would be like expertise and sort of like critical faculties, and that are like the richer aspects of how value gets pumped into the art objects that are being represented, and how that translates online in interesting ways. A better thing to focus on than like reproducing the built art gallery environment. Udit?
I think it's noise for the same reasons why Valdis said it's noise, which is that it's like, I just feel like I've seen so many examples of people try to do this. And when I say people try to do this, I mean like try to replicate physical experiences virtually and just fail at it.
Alison?
I feel like the only thing that is the signal of this example is the pivot, is the change from tool to object. And I think that if that was considered the signal, it would be advantageous to the designers of this or the curators or whoever to consider it in that sense, because they might be able to manipulate and become more critical in that faculty in the same way that everybody's sort of raising. But otherwise, if it's not regarded as interesting for that reason, that might be noise.
There's something really curious about this question, like how does a tool become a venue? It's pretty weird. I'm not sure that it means anything or not, but it's cool.
Yeah, can you Photoshop become a venue for displaying your Photoshop art? I guess people are doing that. The live streaming of people like doing like Photoshopping.
Yeah,
that's like a thing right now.
Like Creative Cloud like a collaboration tool becoming a. Yeah, I guess our ARC document being out on Google Slides is like the tool became the venue there.
Wouldn't it be more interesting, something like SAP becoming like a venue? That would actually be cool. Like if I could see the innards of like a random like food company, like Kellogg's, and just their SAP year in review, I would love, that could be I would love to see that.
That's an art project right there.
Yeah, like where does all that corn come from?
That's a sort of ant farm in itself. Yeah.
How much do they pay their janitors?
Corporation is Ant Colony. That's a nice name for the SAP project. Okay. Podcast from later.